Okay, today we're doing the motion breakdown on the opposition side of UCL IV round 2. If you haven't checked out the first video on the government side, you can go back and watch that, since I'll be using parts of that video for this one as well. Cool, so everyone knows the motion, it's the guiltometer, and we'll be looking at potential up cases. So, like in the other videos, the first thing that I'll do is I'll do some statement generations, so you can pause the video right here, generate some statements, and then compare what you have done to what I have done. Or you can just watch the video, but presumably it's best to do this in an interactive fashion so that you yourself are maximizing the most amount of this video. So, in terms of statements, I have like 4 ideas on op, and these ideas are kind of more on the crazy side of things, or maybe they're wacky, like they're wacky ideas that aren't necessarily that commonly used in debating, which is fun because like it's a bit of a like fresh take on the usual standard motions that I break down here. So there are basically 4 things that you could do here. 2 are in the principled line, 2 are in the practical line. So the first and most basic thing is you can actually take a hardline principle stance here, that this is an illegitimate mitigatory factor. That shouldn't exist, and that you should always prioritize the outcomes rather than like some vague notion of guilt. The second is a more softline principle, i.e. that guilt can't be controlled, that in many cases it's an arbitrary mitigatory factor on you that's placed, and we shouldn't add an additional level of arbitrariness to an already arbitrary, somewhat arbitrary system of sentencing people and stuff like that. Then you can run the flip, which is that more people will feel less guilt, and then you can say that you can control your guilt, and this will allow for manipulation. Now, it's very important that you notice that some of these ideas contradict each other, which is perfectly fine in debating. Like you can, like obviously there are like different versions on how a debate could play out and things like that, meaning that it is completely possible for when you're generating a bunch of arguments to have contradicting ideas. It's important to note this down and to see it, that if you are, how you say, like thinking of running, let's say, the Softline Principle, then you can't run, well, guilt can actually be controlled and it can be manipulated and things like that, because these two ideas concretely contradict each other, right? And also, if your opening runs, like let's say the Softline Principle, you can't run the manipulation point on CO and things like that. So this is just something to note down. It's literally in the rules. If you haven't checked those out, like go read the judge manual where these things are explained. But these are literal contradictions between two ideas. So it's important to note this down before we even get into the statement generation and things like that. Cool, so let's develop each of these arguments one by one. Starting with the hardline principle. Basically, the way that you analyze this argument is we should only prioritize the outcomes. Why? Because some kind of harm has been done in society, and that has consequences, like someone has been wronged. Either a robbery happened and someone's thing was stolen. Either a murder happened and someone lost their life. You could look at other examples of crime, like for example Ponzi schemes where people got scammed. You could look at, for example, like I don't know, like just harassment and things like that. Like there is a victim who has been harmed based upon these particular crimes. We should prioritize the outcomes to the victim. Why? Basically, it's because of the way we view morality. And, like there are 2 ways to explain this. The one way is like with this fancy lingo about, obligations and things like that. I really can't do that stuff. The way I explain things is based on intuitions. And I think this is honestly the human way of explaining it. Like, if you think about, for example, someone committing a crime and them not getting their just desserts. Like, for example, they have robbed someone or a group of people and they're out scot-free, they're walking around. This creates like an inherent negative emotion within you, right? Like some kind of wrong thing was happened. Like that something is wrong with the world or with society in general, and which in general forms like our basis of what is legitimate and what is illegitimate. And the more this thing happens, like if you, let's say the intuition is now not one person has done this, but like a couple of people have done it, couple of 100 people have done it, well, then you feel more and more like unfair. You feel more and more like something immoral has happened, something wrong, and you feel more and more, willing to think about that this is something that you wouldn't like, and you would actually like these people who have wronged society, who have done bad things, to face their legitimate consequences, to be in prison for their actions, and to basically receive what has happened to them when you do very, very bad things. Otherwise, and this is the second thing that you need to prove, if there is this mitigatory factor that's based on guilt, that takes away a segment of, let's say, the sentencing that you are giving in this particular moment. So let's say the person gets 6 years instead of 10 or something like that. So they are getting off easier within society, and then they can have a life and things like that, even though they've done a very egregious act. Then this harms the justice aspect or the retribution that we're supposed to give to both the victim and society in terms of this particular sentencing. Now, when you're running this case, if they ask you, do you support other mitigatory factors existing? You have to say no, because you're running the hardline case in this particular moment, which is that we don't support any mitigatory factors. We don't believe that guilt absolves you of the punishment that you deserve. We think this is inherently immoral, and we should prioritize the victim. You need to uphold this principle to other situations as well. Now, the negative thing is that you also have to support all of these other things, which then could potentially lead to you being attacked from other sides within the debate. But the positive thing is that you're running a very simple case. So if the judge gets it, and if the judge buys it, and it's very straightforward, and it's something that no team can actually respond to comprehensively, then you should win cleanly, right? If you're able to run this argument and do it this way. However, if let's say a team is much easier at attacking this argument, they're able to, explain, actually here are reasons why we care about mitigatory factors, it's not black and white as you say, then you're in a bad spot. So you have to weigh these two different things while you're doing the strategy of building this argument and what you prefer. I think most people would prefer not to run this type of argument, but in certain scenarios, you actually have to run the hardline case and just say, no, this is illegitimate, we don't do it, and things like that. Cool. And that's on strategy and stuff like this. There is a softline principle case here, which is that guilt can't be controlled, and it's basically an arbitrary mitigatory factor. So the first thing that you need to analyze is why guilt can be controlled, because it's based on random factors. Like, let's say your genetics, you could be born with a certain way that makes you less susceptible to feel guilty, like if you are a certain personality type, or like if you had like something in your life that made you this way. So like, let's say your upbringing, you could have been brought up in a family that made you feel less guilt, and for you to think yourself you are entitled. It's also the values that you have. Maybe you think that certain things you could feel guilty for, but other things you could not. So for example, maybe you won't feel guilty for stealing because that's the values that were instilled on you. Your emotional state is also a factor in this particular moment. Maybe you don't feel guilty because of a certain way that you felt during and after the crime, and obviously there are more factors here. Like, we're talking about many crimes all around the world and different reasons that people do crimes. So your feeling of guilt may vary and may be very different throughout different situations. Basically, people are not monoliths. They're very different. And unfortunately, the way that they feel emotions, the way they react to things, is based on arbitrary factors. Is based on all of these things that make you feel the way. If you want to give an intuition here, you could say this is no different from any other emotion. Like, for example, some people are very tight with money because in the past they were wronged in this particular way. Maybe someone promised them for them to borrow some money and to pay them back, and they never did. So like, and this is something that's totally out of their control, even though they started off in this way. So this is why for some people they'll feel a lot of guilt, for other people they won't feel any guilt at all. Then the second thing that you need to explain is, if this is a factor that you can't control, then in many cases this may be the difference for you to get like 2-3 years difference in your sentence, or like maybe a couple of months, or maybe more years. It doesn't matter, but a substantial amount of years in your system, in your sentencing, based on total randomness. based on how you feel. Do you feel enough guilt on this particular thing or not? So, and like this is bad because obviously, like there are two ways to look at it. The first way is prison is horrible. You know, like your rights are taken from you, external harms may happen to you, like for example, gang fights, starting to use drugs. These are mental and physical harms that are necessarily put on you as a person, and you being able, you know, to spend a longer time just because you couldn't feel guilt for this particular moment means that you are more and more likely to be susceptible to all of these types of harms that society imposes on you for doing these things. And now society will impose them even more on you because you just happen to be born in a way that you feel less guilt, even though you and the other guy did the exact same crime in this particular moment. But also the reverse is bad, you know, because like if people get less sentencing because they feel more guilt, then that's also unfair, even if they did the same amount of crime in this particular game. Meaning that this creates a deeply immoral system that just randomly harms people, and we don't think that randomness is good, especially if we're talking about big outcomes, like let's say you being X amount of years in a prison system and things like that. And we should try to make the prison system as non-arbitrary as possible. Now, to this, they could potentially respond by saying, from government, they could say, but isn't like sentencing in general arbitrary, in general moral? And to which you have to respond by saying, look, just because it is currently arbitrary and immoral doesn't mean that we can't try to fix it. But moreover, we shouldn't add an additional level of arbitrariness, an additional level of randomness towards this particular thing, because now it increases the amount of arbitrariness and makes people harmed more and stuff like that. And if they're trying to say on Gov, you know, because I picture the situation already. Like for CG is going to go like, we'll flip this argument. We'll actually explain to you why guilt is not arbitrary and things like that. It is super arbitrary. You have to nail this. You have to hammer this nail very well and to explain, no, this is arbitrary. There are multiple reasons why this is. You're making a comparatively more arbitrary system. And if a judge is normal, they should be able to understand this. Cool. So these are the two principled claims. Let's look at flipping the government case. So the government case last time was guilt will lead to less sentencing because like people who are first-time offenders, young, and stuff like that will feel guilty, and thus if they go to prison for less time, they're less likely to become bigger criminals down the line. So this is the main case that was coming from the government in the previous video. So you can flip this on up and just win the debate by mechanistically proving that these groups of people are actually likely to feel less guilt, or like less guilt than actually more guilt, which means that they'll actually go to prison more rather than less, which flips the government on their head, and it proves that people become bigger criminals on their side of the house. There are probably two reasons why this is the case. Firstly, people have biases towards their own circumstances. They can rationalize it to themselves by telling them, oh, I am the victim, I had to do it out of necessity. If I didn't do this particular crime, like let's say rob a store, sell drugs and things like that, then that means that, for example, I will have to starve, my family would have starved and things like that. I just did what I had to do, blah, blah, blah. Meaning that these rationalizations and these explanations, irrespective of whether they're true or not, right? Irrespective of this, they could be true, they could not be true, are things that people are likely to tell themselves when they're put in this particular position, especially if they have the incentives to cope and make sure that their mental stability in a way is good for them, especially, when they're jailed, when they're being interrogated by the cops and things like that, meaning that the amount of guilt that you feel is likely to be low. So this is the first reason. The second reason is that people who are from poor or like disimpoverished backgrounds are more likely to have violence comparatively more normalized. So that's not to say that all poor people see violence. Like, this is not what I'm claiming, obviously. But there is a strong correlation between you being economically less empowered and you living in, let's say, a comparatively worse neighborhood, a place where, for example, people are more susceptible to doing crime and to doing all of these extra societal activities, like, for example, selling drugs and things like that, because you are forced to do these things. This is the argument here. Meaning that if they see many people opting into this system, many people join a gang, many people sell drugs, many people rob stores and things like that, it's a likely, and if this is something that they have seen since a young age, it's likely to be fairly normalized to them, and for them to feel like this is something as an outcome that is, not good, but, at least acceptable to them and their mental state. Like, why did the other guy do it and I can't do it? Which means that If that's the case, then you're also likely to think that you shouldn't feel guilty or you shouldn't feel bad if many people do this in this particular case. So these two reasons basically mean that the group of people that they're talking about, the first-time offenders, the young people, have very strong incentive to actually not feel that big of a guilt on themselves, which means that then you basically flip the other side, because if you feel comparatively less guilt, then you'll be put in a prison for a longer time, which means that you are more likely to join a gang, you are more likely to do drugs, you are more likely to do all of these things, which means that this metric goes to the opposition side rather than the government. I purposefully didn't write all of the impacts and things like that, since in this point you are conceding that these things are bad, you're just explaining that they're more likely on op, so you're flipping the case. And finally, you could also run that you can simply control your guilt, which will allow for manipulation. So this is a fun argument. It might be a bit crazy, but I don't know. I like it. I would probably run this in this argument, and I thought it would be intriguing to look at it. So here's how I look at this argument. There are many people who basically are able to scam themselves that they're doing the right thing. Basically, they get high on their own supply. So these are people who so much believe the scam that they're doing that they think it's legitimate. So this is like people that are in multi-level marketing, Ponzi schemes, people who are phone scammers, people who do these things. They when they scam the victim, they're like, I assume many of my viewers haven't seen these things, but if you haven't, like, watch this stuff. It's actually very funny. But these people, they truly believe that they are like operating within a legitimate business, and they truly believe that they're doing a societal good and that they're business people and stuff like that, even though they're basically trying to scam people for their money. Like, think of the Jordan Belforts of the world, but like many, because Jordan Belfort is a very successful scammer. This logic can also be cross-applied to other crimes that you're doing. Like, let's say, stealing, let's say, doing drugs, but you are doing it in reverse, right? You are actually going to manipulate yourself or scam yourself that you are guilty in order to deal with the guiltometer and things like that. So you'll do this either before you get caught as a precautionary measure, or when you get caught, like when the police catch you. So this will be a way for you to basically lower the sentencing that you are doing and things like that. So I checked the info site. Nowhere does it say that this machine can catch you if you are not doing this. Can catch you if you are actually trying to manipulate it and scam it and things like that. And here you could give a very simple incentive reason, which is that if the outcome is very, very bad on you, like you would go to prison if for a very long time, if you think you have no other option, that this gives you a huge incentive for you to try to self-manipulate yourself as much as possible, and for you to feel as much guilt as possible in this particular moment, so that you can do the machine thing. Which means that the bottom line of this is both principally legitimate, because we're adding like an additional way for people to randomly lower their sentence, so it's immoral, but also practically it's bad, because some people are just able to manipulate the system and lower their sentence and then go and commit more crimes and things like that. Those are the arguments. Hope you enjoyed your video. Please like and subscribe and comment your ideas below.